Life moves fast these days. Each day, you encounter so many people at work, in casual conversations, within relationships that feel close on the surface. They talk, they laugh, they shake hands as if everything is sincere. But if you look closely, something feels off. A glance that dodges yours, a smile that arrives a few seconds late, a thank you that doesn't sound honest. And then it hits you. You're not just facing people, you're facing performances. The terrifying part is, most of those performances are not unskilled. In this video, Stoic App won't teach you how to be suspicious. We'll teach you how to see through what's not being said, how to listen through stillness, how to recognize a person's nature before they even have time to hide it. If you've ever trusted the wrong one, if you've ever dismissed a subtle sign, this video will return to you something priceless, the ability to see clearly without having to ask. So walk with Stoic App into the art of reading people with awakened eyes and a heart that has learned to stand still in the presence of what feels unclear. 1. Watch how they treat those beneath them. Have you ever noticed how people often behave very differently when they think no one's watching? In meetings, at the office, or around the dinner table, everyone tries to smile at the right time, speak politely, and act professionally. But things become more real sometimes, uncomfortably raw during the ordinary moments, when there's no image to maintain, no one to impress, and no sense that anyone is judging them. That's when character steps out from behind the spotlight, clear, cold, and sometimes so harsh that you can't believe this is the same person. I used to think this man was someone worth learning from. A respected manager, always on time, always composed. Someone known for listening well, and often referred to as a quiet, decent man. At times, I genuinely believed I could learn from his poise and precision, until one morning when I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I was sitting at the far end of the hallway pantry, where the lights were still dim and the quiet was deep enough to catch the smallest sounds. While I was drafting an email, I heard a soft clatter down the Huller mop bucket had tilted, spilling water onto the floor. An elderly cleaning lady, thin and trembling, hurried to clean it up. That Mantha, one I had admired, had just stepped out of the elevator. I waited for a response. A kind word. A nod of empathy. But he just stood there, staring down like he'd seen something inconvenient. He said nothing for a few seconds. Then he pulled out his phone, stepped around the puddle without a glance, and before disappearing muttered, "Whatever your job is, you should learn to do it properly. No eye contact, no help, not even the smallest sign of human decency." And I, sitting behind a pane of glass, felt something in me pause. I couldn't see him the same way anymore. Not because he acted poorly, but because he did so when he thought no one was watching. And it was that exact moment, when there was no one left to impress, that revealed more of who he really was than any meeting or memo ever could. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." But I've come to believe something deeper. The way you treat someone who has nothing to offer you is what the world will truly remember about you. Not the way you shake a client's hand, not the thank you notes you send in corporate emails, but the way you look at a person who cleans behind the scenes, the way you speak to someone who can't speak back, the way you choose to show humanity when no one demands it of you. From that day forward, I started paying closer attention, not in the boardroom, but in empty hallways, in the silence of elevator lobbies, in how someone greets the security guard or doesn't, in the way they nod at the cleaning lady or walk past like she's invisible. I learned to see people through how they treat those below them, and I realized the truly kind ones are kind to everyone, even when there's nothing in it for them. And if you look closely, you'll find them, the ones who are only polite to titles, who only show respect when it benefits them, who are only kind when someone's watching. Don't speak up. Don't judge too quickly. Just pause, stay silent, and watch them in the moment they think no one's watching. That's when you'll see more truth than any introduction could ever tell. And then ask yourself, have you ever sat quietly beside someone you could no longer respect just because you saw how they treated someone weaker? Have you ever stayed silent in a moment like that and slowly walked out of your own trust because of it? Sometimes you don't even need to observe for long. Just stay quiet and they'll tell you more than you ever expected. 2. Create silence and watch what they reveal. There are people who, when you say nothing, end up saying more than they ever intended. And there are others who grow more evasive the more you listen. It is the silence between two people that allows truth to either emerge or retreat into the shadows. I used to believe I always needed something to say, a suggestion, a reply, a perspective. But the older I got, the more I realized. The most valuable part of a conversation sometimes isn't in what you add, but in what you choose to hold back. I remember once, David, a former classmate, invited me for coffee to share a bit about his new job. For the first 10 minutes, everything sounded fine. Good environment, good co-workers, though the boss is a bit strict. I just smiled and nodded. No interruptions, no questions. I didn't say, "You'll get used to it," like I once would have. And then, just 3 minutes later, what began as a harmless workplace update turned into a confession of a racing heart every morning, of being haunted by fear of judgment in a new role, and of an old failure he had never told anyone about. No one asked him to share. No one prompted it. But because no one interrupted, he had room to speak what lay deeper than even he expected. In that moment, I understood more clearly what Stoicism had always taught. You don't need to overpower to understand. You simply need to pause and observe. While the world is loud, a Stoic chooses stillness as solid ground for others to unfold themselves. They don't chase every detail. They don't nod to appear empathetic. They don't rush in to be the hero in someone else's story. They simply stay quiet at the right time and let the other person hear their own heart. And that isn't just some abstract idea. A modern Stoic like Ryan Holiday has chosen to live this way, even in the face of invisible pressure from career and media. When he was still a young marketing director at American Apparel, Ryan was hailed as a PR genius, capable of steering public opinion with a few media moves. But after years in the whirlwind of control and ego, he began to feel drained. In one interview with a major outlet, when the reporter tried to corner him with provoking questions, Ryan didn't retaliate or redirect. He chose silence. He let the moment hang, no dodging, no appeasing, and then he spoke a single line, quoting Marcus Aurelius. "If you are disturbed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." From then on, he stepped away from the stage of fame, choosing a slower life on a Texas farm, writing books, tending his garden, and spreading Stoicism quietly. No one can reach a man who has learned to wield silence as a form of strength. And I learned something too. Next time someone tells you half a story, don't rush in with solutions. Don't hurry to fill the silence with advice or cleverness. Wait one more breath. That pause might contain the part that matters most. Have you ever, out of the urge to be helpful, missed the very thing they were trying not to say? Averted eyes, a sentence left unfinished, a sigh that never found a name. And if you stayed quiet just a little longer, could it be they would have told you what no one else has ever heard? But even when people say nothing, their body is already telling you a story loud and clear. 3. Read the body. When the body speaks before the mind. You've probably heard someone say, "I'm fine," but their shoulders slump, their hands are clenched, Their eyes look away, and their feet subtly point toward the door, as if ready to leave. The words are steady, but the whole body is trembling like a fax line losing signal. That's because the body doesn't lie. Words can be rehearsed, phrases can be polished, but the small movements, shoulders, hands, eyes, neck, knees, toes always reveal what the mind hasn't yet managed to control. And in the absence of speech, the body becomes the most honest translator of emotion. But not everyone shows it the same way. Some people use their body like armor because they're still cautious, vulnerable, not ready to drop their guard. Others use it like a mask to hide what they never want you to see. Both stay quiet. Both smile on cue. But one is trembling inside, while the other is manipulating you with carefully designed signals. I once saw such armor in a first meeting with a younger colleague. He didn't say anything wrong. He nodded, he smiled, but his eyes darted quickly whenever someone mentioned his name. His shoulders shrank slightly, as if afraid to take up space. His hand gripped his pen like it was the only thing holding him steady, and his feet always pointed toward the door, as if the slightest excuse would have sent him walking out. Some might say he was just a nervous new hire, but I knew it was the reflex of someone who had been hurt before, now learning how to survive in a new place. It wasn't deception. It was a survival instinct, expressed through the body even before the mind could register how unsafe it felt. And then there are moments when body language isn't armor, it's a mask. And that mask can be worn with such perfect calm that you don't realize it until it's far too late. Just like Brutus the man Caesar trusted like a son. At their final meeting, Brutus stood beside him, his gaze calm, his face unreadable, his hand resting on the dagger hidden beneath his cloak. When Caesar turned around, he saw nothing suspicious. And then, it was that very hand that delivered the final blow. They say Caesar died from the wound, but I believe he died from trusting a body that didn't tremble, because truth is alive. But lies are rehearsed, and not everyone is a good actor. The honest ones are often clumsy. The fearful ones fidget, bite their lips, glance sideways. But the ones with intent, they learn to stand tall, look you in the eye, and say what needs to be said in a tone they've practiced 100 times in their head. What they still fail to control are the small leaks, a tightening finger, a dry swallow, a shoulder raised too high, feet turned slightly toward the exit. These are the places where your eyes need to slow down and see deeper. Epictetus once wrote, "First, learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." But even before words, a Stoic learns to see with a stillness free from judgment. They don't guess, they don't expose. They simply remain present enough to notice what someone doesn't want revealed, and clear enough not to get pulled into the role they're being invited to play. Not everyone knows how to speak about their fears, but the body always speaks for them. And if you slow down enough, stay quiet enough, and care deeply enough, you'll begin to see. There are those who shrink just to survive the day, and others who build a stage in the middle of real life, hoping you won't realize you've been cast as the unsuspecting audience. To the first, offer space to breathe. To the second, hold your space so you don't get smothered. That's not suspicion. That's clarity. And a Stoic doesn't see clarity as cold, but as a moral responsibility not to harm even themselves. Stoicism doesn't teach you to analyze every finger, twitch, or blink. It teaches you to refine your perception, not to accuse, but to choose your response. Not to control others, but to avoid losing yourself in a carefully crafted setting. And if ever you must step back, do so with respect. No bitterness, no resentment. Just the quiet recognition that you've seen what you needed to see. Have you ever trusted a smile only to blame yourself for months afterward? Ignored a glance that turned away, a hand tucked beneath the table, a breath caught mid-air, when you asked a question that seemed harmless. Thought they were fine until the day they left without saying a word. It wasn't because you weren't good enough. It's because you trusted what they said instead of trusting what their body had been trying to tell you all along. Fourth, follow the eyes, where the soul says what the mouth cannot. Have you ever talked to someone and within just a few minutes, you knew they weren't really there? Their mouth still responded, their head still nodded, their lips smiled at all the right times, but their eyes seemed to be staring off somewhere else, not because they didn't care, but because some part of them had already left the conversation long before the words began, and you felt it not with your ears, but with your eyes. Their gaze didn't lie. It didn't try to prove anything. It just grew still, dimmed, and drifted like someone lost, unable to find their way back. We can learn to control our words, train our voice to sound steady, practice how to smile on cue, nod with the right rhythm, and answer familiar questions with rehearsed lines. But no one can fully learn to lie through their eyes, because the eyes are a direct stream from emotion, unfiltered, unedited. They don't wait for your permission to reveal fear. They don't hold back until you speak to reflect sorrow. Averted glances, rapid blinking, a softened stare-all are unnamed truths. And sometimes, a gaze held too long is the very attempt to hide something behind a sheet of frosted glass. I once asked an old friend, "How's work been lately?" He smiled, softly, same as always. A perfect answer, even tone, nothing suspicious, but I wasn't listening with my ears. I was watching, and his eyes weren't fine. They didn't meet mine, they looked like they'd touched something in memory. A flicker of unease passed through them, like he had stepped into a familiar room that felt colder than he remembered. And then his gaze turned away, as if afraid that if he looked a moment longer, I'd see what he was hiding, a weariness that had built up far too long to be explained in words. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And I believe the eyes are where that color appears first. The thoughts left unspoken, the feelings not yet ready to be shared, the things that haven't found words, they still exist, right there in a gaze that cannot lie. A Stoic doesn't rush to believe, but neither do they rush to doubt. They simply look a little longer, a little deeper, not to force someone into revealing what they're not ready for, but to keep their own clarity. That sometimes what you hear is not what's actually happening. But I've also encountered another kind of gaze, one that didn't turn away, that didn't dim, that looked directly and clearly as if offering complete trust. And yet I saw nothing in it. No worry, no wounds, not even life. Just a well-rehearsed emptiness like a mirror reflecting back at you, so you never realize you're being watched but not truly seen. This is the kind of gaze that knows exactly what you want, then gives it to you, just to lead you away from the truth. And the most dangerous thing is, you believe in that gaze because it never made you feel afraid. Next time you ask someone, "Are you okay?" watch their eyes, not to interrogate, but to be fully present in that moment. When they look at you, avoid your eyes. Ask yourself, what are they running from? A memory, a failure, a truth they haven't faced, or simply themselves, right now. And when someone looks at you deeply, steadily, firmly, don't rush to call it sincerity. Ask yourself instead, are you believing it only because you want to? Have you ever missed someone who needed you, simply because you believed their "I'm fine," looked past their tired eyes and told yourself they were just busy, or stayed silent before a very steady gaze because you didn't have the courage to ask again? Not everyone has the strength to look someone in the eyes and face what's real. But if you don't, that truth will quietly slip past you and leave behind an emptiness with no name. 5. The shift in voice, where truth breaks rhythm. Have you ever listened to someone speak and everything flows smoothly until you accidentally ask the one thing they didn't want to talk about? Their voice begins to waver. Not unclear, not off topic, but uneven. The words are still correct, the sentence is intact, but the tone no longer belongs to someone calm. Something slips out of control, like a cracked note in a symphony that had been playing in perfect time. You can't name it right away, but you know something hasn't been said, because the voice is an unedited reflex. When the mind stumbles, breath breaks rhythm, and when the breath is thrown off, the voice is the first to betray. Even if they keep smiling, even if their words still make sense, just a small shift in pitch, tempo, or cadence is enough for their real emotions to flash through. A voice that speeds up may be trying to dodge. A voice that slows down may be swallowing what can't be spoken. And sometimes it's the perfect flow itself that makes us most cautious. I once sat in on an interview for a project manager role. The candidate was well prepared, articulate, hit every point like clockwork. But when the director asked, "Can you tell us about the biggest mistake you've made as a team leader?" something shifted. His voice went higher. His pace quickened. The answer stretched longer than it needed, as if he was trying to wrap a still open wound in too many words. He talked about teamwork, pressure, lessons learned, but never really answered the question. And that voice, though still polite, still composed, began to fracture at the key words. The next day, I learned that in his most recent role, he had been removed as team lead for mishandling a crisis. It wasn't on his resume. He didn't mention it in the interview, but I had already heard part of that truth, not in his words, but in the way his voice shifted when the question hit the right nerve. Stoicism doesn't teach you to be suspicious, but it teaches you to listen with a clear mind, not getting lost in beautiful phrases, but stepping back to hear what's trembling underneath. Epictetus once said, "First learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." But sometimes, even the speaker hasn't yet understood what they're trying to deny. And the voice, if you're attuned, will speak that part for them. Next time you hear someone slow down or suddenly speak too fast, don't just hear the content. Hear the tone, the hesitation, the length of the pause. Sometimes truth doesn't live in what's said, but in what's held back. And a Stoic, rather than interrogate, chooses to observe, to stay still long enough for what's unspoken to surface through the first cracks in a voice. Have you ever ignored a warning just because the voice delivering it sounded polite, well-structured? Ever walked away from a conversation with a faint gut feeling that something was off, but shook it off because you had no proof? Maybe what you needed to trust wasn't the content, but the break in rhythm that you once heard, but didn't have the courage to believe. And there will come a moment when there are no more words, no more phrasing, just the person, when no one's asking, no one's watching, and there's nothing left to defend. In that moment, silence becomes the most honest voice. And if you are quiet enough, you'll hear everything they never dared to say. And what about you? How many times have you heard a voice that your intuition warned against, but your logic dismissed? If you've ever felt that moment, tell us about a time when you heard what wasn't being said. Because in those quiet stories, we learn how to listen with the heart, not just the ear. 6. Watch them when they think no one is watching. There are people who are always polite when they know you're looking, always gracious when the boss is still in the room, always smiling brightly while the crowd is still watching. But when the lights go out, when a few eyes disappear, when they think it's finally safe to let go, that's when the pieces of who they really are begin to show in the way they turn their head. in a careless, sarcastic remark, or even in the cruel silence they reserve for someone who can't defend themselves. True character doesn't need to be announced. It steps forward without needing an audience. And it's precisely in the moments people believe no one is watching that you'll see who they are more clearly than any introduction or moral speech could ever reveal. I still remember one evening after work. The office had emptied. I came back to my desk because I had forgotten my wallet. Walking past the break area, I heard a low voice. A colleague, someone everyone called thoughtful, kind, was speaking to the new assistant who had only been there a few weeks. The office smile was gone. The polite tone disappeared. What remained was a voice sharp as a blade, dripping with contempt. Next time, don't act smart in front of the boss. That little prompting trick just makes you look cheap. He didn't know I was standing behind the frosted glass. And that moment was the clearest I had ever seen him. Epictetus once said, "Know, first, who you are. But if you want to know who someone else is, you don't have to ask. You don't need to test them, just be patient." A Stoic doesn't need to expose anyone. They simply stand still, quietly observing, like watching a mask fall slowly, 1 millimeter at a time. And if you've ever felt disillusioned by how many people wear two faces, maybe what you need is a living counterexample. Abraham Lincoln was one of those. On a cold, rainy day, he arrived at the White House for a private meeting. At the back gate, an elderly guard was awkwardly removing his mud-soaked boots. No one paid attention. Everyone else hurried past, dignified, composite as if they were on important business. But Lincoln stopped. He said nothing, made no show. He knelt down, helped the man take off his shoes, set them gently aside, and walked on without needing anyone to notice. No story to tell, no lens to capture it. Because he was a Stoic, not kind for applause, but kind because he didn't know how to be anything else. That's what Stoic philosophy always reminds us. Virtue isn't for display, it's for living with yourself. The truly kind don't wait for praise. They remain humble when no one is clapping. They stay gentle with the small and unseen even when there's no scorecard for it. Because kindness, if it doesn't come from the soul, is just a temporary performance waiting to fall when the spotlight fades. So if you're unsure whether someone is genuine, don't rush to ask. Watch them when no one else is watching, when they're with the invisible, when they have the power to look down and no one there to call them out. That's when character steps out without knocking. Sometimes you don't have to wait a lifetime to see someone's true nature. All it takes is a shift in circumstancia, little pressure, a small change in the balance of power, and everything once hidden rises up, like old ink bleeding through white paper touched by water. And that's when you'll know who you're really dealing with. 7. Watch how they react when things are no longer easy. Anyone can smile when they're being loved. Anyone can behave properly when they have something to protect. But when they're rejected, when plans fall apart, when they lose in front of a crowd, that's when their reaction becomes something they can't fake. I once worked with a manager. On a normal day, he was courteous, composed, the kind of person whose presence in a meeting made everyone sit straighter. But one day, a major contract was suddenly cancelled right before signing. There was no time for blame. No one even had a chance to speak, because he was the first to slam his phone on the table, curse aloud, and then lash out at every team member one by one. I wasn't surprised by the project failing. I was stunned because, for the first time, I saw him completely lose the composure he always told others to maintain. Reaction under pressure isn't just a burst of emotion, it's a mirror of one's inner values. Because when stress tightens its grip, all the masks begin to crack, and what's left is who you truly are. But I also once knew someone else. A friend who started a business with me when we were younger. When the project failed, he didn't sigh, he didn't blame. He just sat silently for a few minutes, then looked up and said, "Well, that means we learned more than those who succeeded." The next morning, while I was still tangled in a pile of broken documents, he had already arrived early drafting a new proposal. No one pushed him, no one needed to comfort him. His calm wasn't a facade, it was real strength. And in that moment, I understood. Sometimes, silence is the highest expression of inner power. Seneca once wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." A Stoic does not wish for an easy world. They don't believe peace is handed to them. They forge it from within, so when storms come, they don't just endure, they offer steadiness to those around them. One person who showed this clearly was Tom Hanks. In an interview, he spoke about a time when his career hit a plateau after the bonfire of the vanities. Critically panned, he didn't react defensively. He didn't blame the script. He didn't justify his acting. He simply stepped back, reread scripts, refined his approach, and waited. 3 years later, he returned with Philadelphiathan Forrest Gump and won 2 consecutive Oscars. Not because he pretended he wasn't hurt, but because he knew true strength doesn't come from explosive reactions, but from the quiet ability to rebuild when no one believes in you anymore. That kind of calm doesn't just make you stronger, it makes others believe in you even when they can't yet believe in themselves. It makes you an anchor instead of an emotional burden to the group. And that's the deepest gift of Stoicism. Not to make you emotionless, but to help you master emotions, so that what you express is filtered, intentional, and of value. Next time you truly want to understand someone, don't watch them on their good days. Don't judge them by pleasant conversations or graceful gestures under the spotlight. Wait for things to collapse when the plan falls apart, when a word wounds deeply, when they're pushed out of their comfort zone. That's when the gloss of language will wash off, the mask of composure will crack, and what's left will be the real material. You'll see some explode, some retreat, some search for someone to blame, and then you'll see someone say nothing at all. They simply bow their head, gather their broken pieces, wipe off the dust, and move on. No need for witnesses, no craving for validation, just because it's the right thing to do. Have you ever watched someone change completely because of one small failure? Someone you thought was strong, but one setback revealed their fragility, and the opposite. Have you ever quietly stood beside someone who, despite losing everything, still kept their dignity, spoke no harmful words, and rose again without trying to rebuild an image? If you have, hold on to that memory, because it teaches you this: adversity doesn't create a persona, it simply strips away the paint, the shine, the illusion. And if what remains is stillness, a will unmoved by storms, then you are standing before someone worth trusting, not because they endure well, but because they chose not to hurt the world, even when the world just hurt them. That's power. No shouting, no justification, just the way they stand up and keep walking without losing themselves. 8. Pay attention to what they don't say and the topics they always avoid. Some conversations feel completely natural until you stumble upon a memory the other person always tries to avoid. You ask about a family member and they change the subject. You bring up an old story and they smile it off, then quietly shift away. At first it seems like nothing, but over time you start to feel that empty space isn't harmless. It's like a door that always stays closed, not because no one knocks, but because the person inside has never been ready to open it. I once had a friend like that. He could talk for hours about work, projects, and future goals, but never mentioned his father. One time, someone joked, "You must take after your dad, right?" He just gave a soft smile, changed the topic, eyes dropping slightly, shoulders subtly pulling back as if the question had touched something it shouldn't. I didn't ask again, but deep inside, I always wondered what made someone so intelligent, so confident, avoid talking about family with such precision. Later, during a completely different conversation, I found out that father had walked out when he was still a boy, during an event so painful, no one in the family dared speak of it again. He grew up with a question that never had an answer. And maybe he chose success as a kind of armor so no one would see the child who had once been left behind. That day I understood. That evasive smile wasn't indifference. It was an old wound still pulsing beneath the surface. Stoicism doesn't teach you to force others to reveal everything they've hidden. It teaches you to see with a gaze free from judgment. A Stoic is still enough not to intrude, quiet enough not to interrupt, and sensitive enough to recognize. There are places in another person's soul where the only respectful thing you can do is to stand still, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because when someone keeps avoiding a subject again and again, don't try to drag them back. Don't make them feel inspected, but don't dismiss it either. Hold your silence gently, because that very space they avoid may be a place no one has ever approached with trust. And sometimes the silence you hold for someone is the only gift of restoration they're still able to receive. What about you? Is there something you always skip past so quickly that even those closest to you hesitate to mention it? Is there a place in you where the moment someone steps close, you smile, then turn away, as if the memory never existed? It's okay. We all have something unsaid. But if you can find the courage to admit it even just to yourself, that's already the first step toward healing. Because reading someone isn't about controlling or judging them. It's about learning where to stop and where, if you are still enough within yourself, you might become the first person to stand beside them when they're finally ready to come home to who they are. If you've ever gone quiet in front of a truth that hasn't yet been touched, leave us a line below. Somewhere out there, someone else may be carrying the same silence you are. You've just walked through 8 signs subtle, yet powerful enough to lift the curtain on relationships you once believed were real. Not to make you suspicious, but to teach you how to see with eyes that no longer seek validation and a heart no longer desperate for sweet-sounding words. In modern life, everyone plays a role. Some perform to be loved, some perform to avoid getting hurt, and some perform to manipulate without anyone noticing. But a Stoic doesn't seek to expose anyone. They simply observe in quiet awareness. And when needed, they choose to walk away without noise, without blame. Because in the end, reading people isn't about gaining power over theme. It's about preserving your own freedom. Next time, when someone smiles too perfectly, stays silent at all the right moments, or avoids a topic again and again, you don't need to confront them. Just be still enough to see and strong enough not to take another step into a space that was never meant for you. If this video helped you see through something that once confused, you share it with someone else who's also trying to make sense of this world. And remember, Stoic app will keep guiding you through even deeper journeys where truth doesn't need to shout to be heard.